Good morning. All right, so here's the last lesson on Chapter 6. It's 6.5 slope point form of the equation of a linear function. So again, we are still just looking at straight lines on graphs. Last lesson, we were able to see that we can represent any of the lines in a form like this, y equals mx plus b, where your m is your slope and your b is your y-intercept, where it crosses this line here. Okay, so what y value it crosses the y-axis. So you have that as your equation. Today we're just going to be shifting over, and you could note that you can also represent it in this form. It seems a bit more complicated. You see a y1, you see an x1, you still see an m, and you still see an x and a y. Okay, so this is really similar to the y equals mx plus b. The y there is that y there, the m is that m, and the x is that x. Okay, so this type of the equation doesn't actually have a b value for it. It's called the slope point form, which means that it only includes a slope, and then you can see this x1 and this y1. That's the point. We know a point can be represented as x1 comma y1 on a graph. For example, well, we'll see an example down here, if I said there's a point at 2 comma 3, that would be right 2 up 3, that would be right there. If I say that's a point on the line, that's when I could plug it into those numbers. I could put the 2 in for the x1 and the 3 in for the y1. So the x1 is the first one, the y1 is the second one. Okay, so again, instead of putting a b value in, say you didn't know what the b value is, but you knew a point on the line, you could then use this equation with this value instead of the b value. Okay, but you'll still need to know the slope because both equations use slope. All right, so this is the new equation for representing lines. Okay, so they give us an equation here, and we have to figure it out. The first point is our slope. If we look at our equation here, m is the one outside the bracket, so 1 over 3 is the m value. Our point here is, let's see, our point here, negative x, positive 4, negative y, negative 2. So this is the hard point here. If you notice, it's a plus right there, and then this is a negative, right? So what does x1 have to be so that minus something gives you a plus? x1 would have to be negative 4, because minus negative 4 gives you plus 4. Okay, so our first value would be negative 4. It's really the opposite sign of what it shows, and the same with the y. So here, what y1 value will give you negative 2 when you have a negative in the front? So negative something will give you negative 2. So negative, a positive 2 will give you negative 2. So our point will be negative 4, 2. One way to remember it is you just take the opposite symbol of that one and the opposite symbol of that one. Okay, so negative 4, positive 2. All right, so the slope is always just the same, it's just the number there. Okay, so now that you've determined what the slope is and what the point is, you can graph it. And what you do is you start on the point, and then you use the slope to find the other point. So negative 4, 2 is down 4, or left 4, up 2, and you put your dot. That's where our point is, and it's on the line because it's in this equation. And now we have to use the slope, which is, if we remember, rise over run. So we got to rise 1 and run 3 from this point. So rise 1, run 3, put another dot. Now that you have 2 dots, you can draw the line. So this equation is the same thing as this line here. if you notice, it crosses the y-intercept in kind of a fraction spot. Okay, so I couldn't really represent it as this form in this question. Okay, this one's probably the most useful one, but second bet, when you can't use it, you use this one. All right, so here's another question. Y plus 1 equals negative half x minus 2. Okay, so our slope, again, is just our m value. It's this value here, so it's negative 1 over 2. Okay, and generally when I have a fraction like that, I put the negative up on the top, and I put the 2 on the bottom. Our point is you take the opposite sign of both these numbers. So negative 2, we're going to put a positive 2. And then this one's a positive 1, so I'm going to put a negative 1. Okay, so that means the point that this line runs through is 2, comma negative 1, and the slope that it'll have is negative 1 over 2. Okay, and that's just directly from here. All right, so let's draw the point to negative 1, put a dot, and then we're going to go rise of negative 1, so we're going to go down 1 to the right 2. Down 1 to the right 2, put another dot. Now that I have 2 dots, I can draw my line. So here you can notice that it's going to go right through 0, 0. So if I wanted to represent this line as the other equation, I still could. So it's kind of beside the fact because we already drew the line, but if I wanted to write it in another form, I could go y equals, the slope will always be the same, negative 1 over 2x, and my b value, it goes right through 0, so is plus 0. So that's another way to represent. Those two equations mean the exact same thing. And you could actually use some algebra to rearrange this, and you'd see that it's exactly the same as this. All right. Example 2, write an equation in slope point form for this line. So you notice it says slope point, not slope intercept. It says slope point. So write an equation in slope point form of this line here. Okay, so your first goal is we have to find the slope. What's our slope? It's, let's see, if I start at this point and I want to go to this point, I go up 3 over 4. So my slope is going to be 3 over 4. And then we have to just pick any point. We could pick this point or we could pick this point. Okay, so I'm going to pick this one up here, which is 3, 1, which is the point 3, 1. So my point is 3, 1. So if I want to put it in our slope point formula, it's y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. That's what the equation is, but now we have to put in numbers for the y1, the x1, and the m. So here we have a 1, positive 1, so we're going to have to switch the sign. So it's going to be y minus 1 equals 3 over 4 instead of our m, and then our x, opposite sign of that, negative 3. So that's our slope point formula for this line. All we needed was a point on the line and the slope. It says write an equation in part A. Write the equation in part A in slope intercept form. So now it doesn't say slope point, slope intercept form. What is the y-intercept of this line? So if you look, it kind of intercepts not in a nice spot, not right on the middle of two grids. So we have to do some algebra from this, and I can show you, like I was saying before, you can get from this equation back to this equation. So we're going to start out with this and do some algebra. Y minus 1 equals 3 quarters x minus 3. So let's do some algebra. I'm going to distribute this 3 quarters into this one here. So y minus 1 equals 3 over 4 x, and now we have to go 3 over 4 times negative 3. Okay? 3 over 4 times negative 3 is the same thing as negative 3 over 1. And when you're multiplying fractions, you just multiply the top numbers and the bottom numbers. So it'll give you negative 9 over 4. So it'll be negative 9 over 4. Now the brackets are gone. And so now I just have to, if I want it to look like this form, I have to get y by itself. So I got to add the 1 to both sides. So now I get y equals 3 over 4x, and it's minus 9 over 4 plus 1. If I have to add negative 9 over 4 and plus 1, I'll make it over 1. This one's different. Instead of multiplying, we're adding. So if you've got to add, you need the bottom or the denominators to be the same. So we're going to make that one the same. So we'll times by 4 times by 4, and we'll get negative 9 over 4 plus 4 over 4. And then now that the denominators are the same, we can add the top numbers and keep the bottom one. So negative 9 plus 4 is negative 5, and we just keep the same bottom. So now I've added these two here. So now I have y equals 3 over 4x minus 5 over 4. All right, so you can see I went from this equation, did some rearranging, and found out that it's the same as this. So it says, what is the y-intercept of this line? Well, we just look at the b value, because it's y equals mx plus b, and that b that we found out was negative 5 over 4. The slope is still 3/4, you can see, but our b value is negative 5 over 4, so it's right there, must be negative 5 over 4. So b equals negative 5 over 4, and this is our y-intercept value. All right, onward. So now we have write an equation for the line that passes through 1, negative 1, and is parallel to the line of 2 over 3x negative 5. So I'm still going to go over these, but these I'm not really going to expect on a test, but it's important to know what parallel and perpendicular means for future courses. So write an equation for the line that passes through 1, comma negative 1, and is parallel to the line. So parallel just means same slope. Parallel is the easy one. Perpendicular means 90 degrees and negative reciprocal slope. That's a more complicated one. Okay, that word negative reciprocal. So let's look at this. Write an equation for a line that passes through negative 1, negative 1. So that's my x1, y1, and is parallel to the line y equals 2 over 3x minus 5. So if we look at this number, this is our slope for this line. So new line is parallel, so it has the same slope as this one. So that 2 over 3 must be in our new equation as well. So I'm going to do this equation because they give us a point in our new line. So that means we need to have the slope point form. So it's 1, negative 1. We're going to have to use the opposites of these numbers. So so we're going to have to write y plus 1 instead of negative 1 there equals our m value will be the same because it's parallel, 2 over 3, and then we have x, and instead of positive 1 we're going to use negative 1. And we just found the point slope form for this new line that's parallel to this one and goes through this point. Now this one here, it's a similar question. New line, there is the slope of the other line, but our new line is perpendicular, which means it's a negative reciprocal slope of this one. Okay, so it's still going to go through that one point where it's positive 1, negative 1, so we can still go plus 1. This is going to be our m value, and then x minus 1. So we got to find out what our m value is. because we already knew it was through the same point. So here, negative just means, let's copy down that slope, 2 over 3 with a negative. There, we've checked off the negative part. What's reciprocal mean? It just means flip the fraction. So instead of 2 over 3, it's going to go to 3 over 2. And now the reciprocal part's done. So if it's perpendicular, our new slope is not 2 over 3, because that would be parallel. It's going to be negative 3 over 2. So we have y plus 1 equals negative 3 over 2 x minus 1. All right. So again, parallel, perpendicular, I probably won't test you on, but it's important for the future. So determine the x and y intercept of the following equation. So again, what's x-y intercept? Where it crosses the x-axis, where it crosses the y-axis. Generally, every line will cross somewhere on the x-axis, somewhere on the y-axis, unless you have a vertical or a horizontal line. So we have this equation here. Wow, it looks kind of complicated, so it must be the slope point form. All right. So generally, if you're working with this type of question, finding the x and y intercept, you don't really have to do much. You just have to realize that if it's going to cross the x-axis, the y value must be 0, because the whole x-axis is on the y value of 0. Okay? So if you want x-intercept, make y equals 0. Okay? So now with this equation here, my y value is going to be 0, but I'm just going to copy it down first. My y value is 0. We have to do a little bit of algebra to solve for what x value it's going to be. So 0 plus 3 is 3. And let's distribute this 2 to the inside. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. We're going to add this 2 to both sides, so we get a 5 equals 2x. And then we're going to divide by 2 to get x by itself. And then so it's going to be x is 5 over 2. So that's the x-intercept of this line. Y-intercept, we have to make x equals 0. We have to do the opposite, because the spot that it crosses this line is when the x value is 0, because the whole y-axis is on x equals 0. So we're going to write down the same exact equation here. And we're going to make x 0. Okay, 0 minus 1 is negative 1. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Solve for y, so we got to get it by itself. So we got to subtract negative 3 to both sides. So we'll get y equals negative 5. Okay, so we just found the y-intercept and the x-intercept. So the y-intercept is negative 5, so it must be down here somewhere. And then x is 5 over 2, which is the same as 2.5. So it must be somewhere there. So doing this, you could also graph the line if you needed to, but it didn't ask for that. But that's what the line would look like from this equation. Okay. Okay, so last page. Use the following information to write an equation for a line. Write each equation in slope point form and slope intercept form. So our two forms we have to write it in. Okay. Remember, one has a point in a slope, one has an intercept in a slope. So if we find slope, we're going to be good for both. So we're given 2 points here. If you remember from way back when, we can find the slope with an equation that looks like this. M is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And if we look, we're going to go x1, y1, x2, y2. Okay, so here I can replace these numbers. y2 is 4, y1 is 2, x2 is 3, x1 is negative 1. So now it's going to be 2 over 4, because 3 minus minus 1 is the same as 3 plus 1. That's going to give me 1 over 2. So the slope is going to be 1 over 2. So in both these forms, that'll be the slope. Okay. All right. So we're going to have slope point we're going to do first. Slope point. So it's going to be y minus y1 equals mx minus x1. So it's going to be, here if you notice, for slope point you can literally put any point in for y1, x1. So I already said this was x1, y1, so let's just put this point in this equation. So we have to do the opposite of y1, which is negative 2. Our slope is 1 over 2. And then it's x minus x1. So opposite of negative 1 is positive 1. So there's our slope point form. Solved it. So now if we want to go into slope intercept form, I have to rearrange this until I get to the form. So let's distribute this into the brackets to get rid of it. So it's going to be y minus 2 equals half x plus a half. And now I have to get y all by itself, so I have to add this 2 to the other side. So it's going to be y equals half x plus a half plus a 2. Now I got to add 2 and a half together, so I'm going to do this on the side. 2 plus 1 over 2. I got to make that over 1. I have to get the denominators the same, so I have to times by 2 to both sides. So now we're at 4 over 2 plus 1 over 2. And now we add the tops 5 and we keep the bottom the same. So it's going to be 5 over 2. So these two added together make 5 over 2. So it's y equals half x plus 5 over 2. Now we have slope point, and this is slope intercept form. All right. Last question. X-intercept of 5 and perpendicular to y equals negative 3 over 2x minus 8. So here we need perpendicular to this slope. So our new slope is negative reciprocal, so instead of minus it'll be a positive, and it'll be the flipped version, which is 2 over 3. That's our new slope. And it says x-intercept of 5. So we can have y equals 2 over 3x plus b is going to be our new equation. So we need to find out what our b value is. So it says x-intercept of 5, which means that there's a point that is 5 comma 0, because that's what an x-intercept is of 5. It's 5 comma 0. So we can plug that into our equation to find out what the equation is going to be. So this is our x value, this is our y value, so you can take this point and you can plug it into the x value and the y value like so, and we can solve for b. Okay, so our b value is this. We can go 5 times 2 is 10 over 3, so we get 0 is 10 over 3 plus b. We have to get b by itself, so let's subtract this negative 10 over 3. So we get a b value of negative 2 over 3. So if I rewrite our equation, I can write y equals 2 over 3x negative 10 over 3. There's slope intercept. Now if you want slope point, we already have our slope. So I can go y minus y1 equals mx minus x1. And that means my y1 is going to be y1 x1 can be any point, so I'm going to use this point 0, 5 or 5, 0. So my y1 is just 0, so minus 0. My m is 2 over 3. And then my x1 is the opposite of this, so negative 5. So that's the slope point form right there. All right, so again, perpendicular I won't quite test on, but it's important to know what it is. And here's our practice questions, page 372. Thanks.